Hello everyone, and thank you for joining this presentation. The title of this poster is, Increase in the Curie Temperature Induced by Calcium Doping in Barium Titanate, Confirmation by Complementary Techniques. Today I'll walk you through what we found when we doped barium titanate with 5% calcium. Barium titanate is a lead-free ferroelectric ceramic, and our goal was to improve its thermal stability, its Curie temperature, without losing its dielectric and energy storage performance. Let's start with the crystal structure itself. Below the Curie temperature, barium titanate sits in a tetragonal phase, a classic BaTiO3 perovskite, with the A cation at the corners and titanium at the center of an oxygen octahedron, just slightly off-center. That tiny displacement is what creates the dipole responsible for ferroelectricity. As temperature rises, the dielectric constant climbs and peaks right at the Curie temperature. That's the ferroelectric to perielectric transition. Push past that temperature, and the structure snaps into a cubic phase. Titanium moves back to the center, the dipole disappears, and the material becomes perielectric. This structural behavior is also what drives the piezoelectric effect. Stress generates a voltage in the direct effect, and applying a voltage produces strain in the converse effect. That's the working principle behind devices like capacitors and pyroelectric and piezoelectric sensors, which in turn show up in everything from consumer electronics to automotive and biomedical applications. Now, the problem is that pure barium titanate has a fairly low Curie temperature, around 130 degrees Celsius, which limits its use at higher temperatures. So we introduced calcium into the A site. Since calcium is smaller than barium, it distorts the lattice, and that's the lever we wanted to use to shift that transition upward. So, our objective was simple: raise the Curie temperature of a 5% calcium-doped barium titanate ceramic, using a simplified solid-state route, while keeping its dielectric and energy storage properties intact. For the synthesis, we started from barium carbonate, calcium carbonate, and titanium dioxide. These were milled together for 3 hours with zirconia balls to improve homogeneity and reactivity, then pressed into pellets. We calcined at 1050 degrees Celsius for 1 hour to form the perovskite phase, and sintered at 1225 degrees Celsius for 3 hours to get dense bulk ceramics. It's a simple, scalable route, nothing exotic, which is actually one of its strengths. Let's get into the results, starting with the dielectric behavior. This is really the heart of the story. We measured the dielectric constant at 1, 10, and 100 kHz, and in every case the peak showed up at the same temperature, 157 degrees Celsius. At 1 kHz, the maximum dielectric constant reached about 1858, with low losses at lower temperatures. Now, why does this matter so much? The permittivity versus temperature curve is the standard, most accepted way to determine the Curie temperature in bulk ferroelectric ceramics. And what we got, 157 degrees Celsius, is notably higher than what you'd expect for barium titanate doped with just 5% calcium, and well above the 130 degrees Celsius of the undoped material. That result was surprising enough that we didn't want to rely on a single technique to confirm it, so we brought in 2 independent methods to check it. First, thermal analysis. TGA on the precursor powders showed the reaction was essentially complete above 926 degrees Celsius, and for the sintered ceramic, mass loss was practically negligible, so the material is thermally stable. More importantly, the DSC curve showed an endothermic peak at about 155 degrees Celsius, corresponding to the ferroelectric to perielectric transition. That's in excellent agreement with the 157 degrees Celsius we saw dielectrically. Second, and this is the clincher, temperature-dependent X-ray diffraction with Rietveld refinement. At room temperature, we confirmed a clean, single-phase perovskite with no secondary phases. We then collected patterns 25 up to 200 degrees Celsius. From 25 to 150 degrees Celsius, everything is consistent with the tetragonal ferroelectric phase. Around 160 degrees Celsius, the characteristic splitting of the 002 and 200 reflections merges into a single peak, a clear structural signature of the transition to the cubic perielectric phase. Rietveld refinement confirmed this, and we could actually see the titanium ion gradually moving back toward the center of the unit cell as we approached the transition, which lines up perfectly with the loss of spontaneous polarization. So we have 3 independent lines of evidence: dielectric spectroscopy, DSC, and temperature-dependent XRD, all pointing to the same transition, all landing within a few degrees of each other. That agreement is really what gives us confidence that this Curie temperature increase is real, and not some artifact of one particular measurement. Moving to microstructure, SEM shows a dense, homogeneous ceramic with well-defined grain boundaries and low porosity, relative density of 97.69%. Grain size averaged around 389 nanometers, which is fairly fine for this kind of ceramic, and fine grains generally help with breakdown strength, which is good news for energy storage applications. Speaking of which, the polarization versus electric field loop came out relatively slim, with a maximum polarization of 18.53 microcoulombs per square centimeter, a remanent polarization of 7.56 microcoulombs per square centimeter, a coercive field of 9.25 kilovolts per centimeter, and a maximum field of 113.7 kilovolts per centimeter. From that loop, we calculated a recoverable energy density of about 270 millijoules per cubic centimeter. The shape actually sits somewhere between a conventional ferroelectric and a weak relaxer-like response, which works in our favor here, decent polarization with only a moderate remanent component. Finally, a quick look at PFM. Before polling, the ferroelectric domains point in different, essentially random directions. After we apply an electric field, they align, which tells us the domains are genuinely mobile and switchable, consistent with everything we saw in the hysteresis loops. So, to wrap up, we made a 5% calcium-doped barium titanate ceramic using a simple solid-state route, and it came out dense, 96.69%, fine-grained, single-phase tetragonal, with a dielectric constant around 1858 and a recoverable energy density 270 millijoules per cubic centimeter. But the main result of this work is the Curie temperature itself, 157 degrees Celsius, confirmed not by one measurement, but by three independent techniques agreeing with each other, dielectric, thermal, and structural. That consistency is what makes us confident this enhancement is real, and we attribute it to lattice distortion and stronger titanium-oxygen octahedral interactions introduced by the calcium substitution. Overall, this shows that a fairly simple processing route can give you a lead-free barium titanate ceramic with better thermal stability, without giving up dielectric, ferroelectric, or energy storage performance, which makes it a promising candidate for high-temperature electronic applications. This study, along with all the details behind it, is available in our recent Ceramics International paper, referenced right here on the poster. Thank you very much for your attention.